And it is Mark Anderson, and he'll be talking on artificial intelligence and aliens. Mark has been interested in the field of the paranormal and UFOs his whole life, having personally witnessed numerous paranormal experiences starting in his childhood. These encounters went right into his early 20s and left an insatiable curiosity about these subjects. Having recently moved professionally into the field of data analytics, Mark has immediately seen tremendous potential in applying both emerging and established technologies to deliver new insights into ufology and the paranormal. So with a quick run through of what it is that he's found over the past several years as he's been researching this, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Anderson.
Hello everyone. I'm just going to check, first of all, I can actually use a PowerPoint presentation. I've got 2 degrees in computing, but sometimes I still make mistakes. That works. So, today what I'm going to be speaking about is more just than an artificial intelligence, something called being data-driven. And if anybody's ever been watching any of the Senate hearings, there is a new group, one of many since the 40s, that have been Project Grudge, Blue Book, OSAP, which I'll be speaking about quite extensively, and the latest one is Arrow, and I think it's All Anomalous Resolution Office, and it's directed by a gentleman called Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who frequently says he has a data-driven approach to actually finding out the answers to extraterrestrial life. However, despite all these many programs that have been going on for decades now, we still haven't got any answers. And I think for most of us in the UFO community, we're getting quite frustrated by the fact that there's just no answers coming about. So what this talk about is actually going to be talking about how we can use a data-driven approach to actually getting our own answers. I won't be talking about AI in a speculative sense. You're probably well aware of people like Dr. Avi Loeb and his speculations on how AI could be some sort of alien life, for example, or even some of the other theories such as we're living in a parallel universe or AI-generated universe. I won't be speaking about that. I'll be speaking about AI that we have currently and having methodologies that we have currently at our disposal. So a lot of this stuff I'm going to be speaking about is actually stuff that we can do. And what I'm hoping to do is allow us to get our own answers. Excuse me, I thought I had this timer on. So that's what it's about. One thing I'm going to be speaking about extensively is data. And the reason why data is so important is because this has fueled a new world. It has fueled a new economy. While there's been things such as the Great Revolution or the Industrial Revolution, nowadays it's a fourth revolution and it's been caused by data. That's allowed things like artificial intelligence to become so prominent. It's actually not the algorithms or any of the things that we probably hear in the BBC that actually make AI so powerful. It's data. So by having really good data, we can use artificial intelligence and other forms of really powerful analytic tools to actually get some really powerful insights. And we can also be able to get really good answers into the UFO phenomenon. What I'm going to be speaking about overall, over and above being data-driven, is also being something that's maybe a bit new called being a data democratic. And the UFO community is actually very data democratic as it is. However, I'd like to see how we can expand on this and actually be able to get, again, better questions and better answers. So, the thing is, with any form of organisation or any form of IT or business intelligence or any form of analytics or even AI, you need to have a purpose. Nowadays, we hear on the BBC or any other sort of news outlet, AI. However, there needs to be solutions, there needs to be a purpose behind it. You need to have a direction on how you're going to use artificial intelligence or data analytics or any form of data or IT. It just works that way. That's the way it's designed to work. So by being data-driven, we're going to apply purposes to things like data and artificial intelligence. Data-driven, though, is actually there's quite a bit to it. And the most important thing about being data-driven isn't artificial intelligence or data or cloud or big data or all of those words you've heard. It's not even quantum computing. It's actually having a strong culture. And one of the best examples of having a data-driven decision-making was actually Deckman Woods, where there was no IT involved whatsoever. Malcolm will be probably spoken about Deckman Woods better than ever I can. But one of the things that made Deckman Woods just so prominent and so interesting was the fact that it was investigated by the police. And one of my friends is actually an ex-police officer who was absolutely astonished by the level of detail and investigation by the police constable, PC Ian Wark. Now, I think it's PC Wark if he was a detective. Please forgive me. You don't actually need a dog to be data-driven. This is my dog Jarvis, and I live right next to Deckman Woods. But it does help. Well, not him, he's daft as a brush. But being data-driven, actually, with people like Ian Wark made decisions based on the data that he had. And that is the most crucial part of being data-driven. Whether you have any sort of advanced or fancy stuff, it's being able to make decisions with data. All too often, people tend to make decisions or use the data that actually supports their hypothesis or their gut feelings. However, the way we need to do it is actually the opposite. We get the data and we make decisions from it. And one of the things, one of Ron's books, I can't remember if it was Scotland X-Files or whatever, but Ron actually said about how the skeptics did the thing exactly the opposite. They were making up theories, trying to support their hypothesis, and that's not the way to do it. A lot of the times, we're probably just going to end up in dead ends, or things that we're hoping to be promising just won't turn out to be anything as much as we would hope to be. However, when you see that being data-driven actually can turn out investigation in cases like Deckman Woods, we can see the tremendous potential from it. So, being data-driven, the most important thing is having a culture where people actually are able to make the decision based on data. The rest of the other things I'm going to be speaking about throughout the presentation. However, there's one thing of absolute importance, and that's to ensure privacy and ethical considerations when we're dealing with data. It's incredibly powerful. Everybody's been listening to the BBC, everybody's been listening to things about AI, and while a lot of the time it's being exaggerated, there is actually a real and legitimate threat from AI. By ensuring privacy and ethical consideration, we're making sure that we're also being legal. There's a number of laws such as the GDPR, for example, that we need to abide by. However, I would also go so far to say that we need to also be compassionate. Within this community, within the UFO community, we need to ensure that we actually look after the people who maybe have abductions or had traumatic experiences and ensure that they're able to get the support and help and the compassion that they need to be able to form and live productive lives. So, how would I go about having an ideal scenario? One thing I would like to discuss about is being democratic. And what that means is everybody gets a say. There's a number of organisations such as MUFON or other organisations that have allowed people to analyse their databases, analyse their data set. However, I think it should go further. I think being able to allow people to actually answer to devise questions and then us to be able to answer them is going to be the way that we actually become data democratic. And that's entirely possible. There's traditional ways such as polls or surveys, but nowadays such as things like ChatGPT, this again can be done very, very effectively. One thing nowadays is offshoot of the GDP sort of technology, the transformer technology, is local language models. And one of the best places I actually saw them being discussed was Coast to Coast AM. These have been released by Meta, the company that owns Facebook, and people have downloaded them numerous times, they've been changed, and there's even one for Glasgow. It's a bit rude. I was going to actually put it up here, but it's it'd be probably called a ball bag. So I thought I'd leave it tonight instead. I get that from the wife. So anyway, what we can do is be able to allowing people to ask questions. And one way is when people ask questions through things like ChatGPT or through surveys or polls, we're able to collate them. We're able to analyse what people are asking for, and we're able to use that to define objectives. We're able to collect data. I'm going to show some ways that we can collect data. Some of them are quite new, and then from there, I'm going to show how we can actually perform incredibly powerful analysis and then report on it. So, my ideal organisation would be something like Spacebook, and I don't know where I got the name from. This is a fictitious organisation, and what happens when you're ever being trained to be a Microsoft developing or in business intelligence or databases, Microsoft actually develop databases for you to actually practice on. Their sort of databases are things like bicycle companies or the likes. My ideal scenario would be something like Spacebook, where it would work almost like Uber, where you'd have UFO groups being able to use this sort of system, and they'd be able to upload data and actually perform powerful analytics on that data, but also for witnesses or experiencers to be able to contact UFO groups through this organisation. The reason why the rating system is really important is we want to ensure that best practice is always ensured, whether it's an analysis or ensuring that privacy and ethical considerations are put in. We need to ensure that that people are always dealt compassionately. And rating systems, we see them in Google or TripAdvisor, are actually quite an effective way of doing that. By being data-driven, we're only going to be based on, we're going to be answering questions and performing analysis and insights in a way that's based on the data, not by gut feelings. And we tend to be democratic so that people are able to ask questions, perform analysis themselves, even report on the data as they see fit. However, an organisation like this is going to take a great deal of maturity to actually come about. It's going to depend on new forms of technology, especially cloud technology. And the majority of people have actually used cloud in some form. You've used Google Maps, for example, or Google Photos. These are all examples of cloud-based technologies. However, cloud-based technologies are also extremely expensive. And although they can have powerful analysis and powerful AI, and also vast amounts of compute and data storage, they do operationally, they're very, very expensive to run. So in my scenario, what I'd imagine is something about maybe 10 to 15 years old, where they're actually becoming quite a successful organisation and they have the money to support a cloud-based solution. So they wouldn't start off just being starting off the cloud originally. It'd be too difficult. So how would they start off? Even being data-driven, even from the start, there's a great deal we can do. For example, even using old PCs or some sort of other technologies, we can actually use them to provide sightings. There's even things like spreadsheets, so things like Excel or Google Sheets, for example, are actually really powerful. There's a lot we can do with them. And for people who want to venture into programming and even other forms of data analysis, you can actually download things like Python, for example, which is an extremely common programming language. You don't even need to learn how to program to actually get powerful insights or how to use artificial intelligence. There's other programs there that can actually do it for you. And these are things like Orange. And you can actually learn them for free on YouTube. As an organisation would grow, you need to improve and you would need to go to the cloud. Unfortunately, you do need to scale. To be able to be really successful, you would need to go and use some of these cloud-based solutions. And most of the organisations that I see nowadays are in a kind of a hybrid between a cloud solution and also having servers that they own themselves. Where we can utilise data from that is things like is the AI services. that Microsoft, Amazon and Google all provide, and some of them are actually extremely powerful. As the organisation grows and becomes more effective, then you can become fully cloud adopted, and again there's powerful tools at your disposal. Over and above the powerful AI tools, you also have extremely complex analysis tools and a large degree of data storage. You can also report things on dashboards that are highly visual and interactive, and be able to get really decent, strong insights, again, using a cloud-based solution. However, this does take a lot of money, and it does take a lot of time for an organisation to be that successful. Even from year one, there's still a great deal we can do, and there's a lot we can do even just with basic technology, even with your own PC. For example, using social media or trying to find data from social media, you can use Twitter and download, and there's actually, you're able to connect to Twitter using what's called an application programming interface or an API, and you're able to actually get the data source and be able to get insights even from Twitter that costs absolutely nothing. However, as a solution becomes more mature and more advanced, what you'll find is you'll be able to then utilise things like Facebook data and also Twitter or other social medias as well. So how do you start? The first thing is you need to do is define clear objectives. Now, in my professional life, I actually work as a business intelligence manager. I actually run a team that actually does perform analytics and business intelligence. And the most important thing is to have a clear objective. If you don't have a clear objective, if it's a bit vague, you find that the results, the time it takes to get these results, takes too long. So it's really important from the get-go that we're able to get clear objectives being put through. And again, being data democratic, where I think these objectives should come from is what the community or what the UFO community want answered. That could be what's the intent of the phenomena, or how does it affect us? Now, I'm never going to be able to give you answers, but I can give you insights. That is definitely possible. However, answers are going to be a bit more tricky. What we need to do, again, is come from the questions and then try and find out how we get that data to answer these questions. And there's a bit of a knack to that. Where I've found is actually probably the most successful and probably most insightful forms of data analysis isn't going to come from UFO sightings, for example. I actually genuinely think it's actually going to come from the sort of AI methodologies that are used for marketing. I'll explain why I'm going to come from that. The next part is we need to collect the data. Once we have a clear objective put through, we need to know what sort of data to collect. And nowadays, as storage has become considerably cheaper, there's a term called big data actually out in the wild. And big data essentially means that we can store vast amounts of data. We can also store lots and lots of different data, and it can come in extremely quickly. However, the third part of it, these three parts are called volume, velocity, and variety. However, the most important part is value. We need to collect valuable data that can actually help us to answer these questions. So we need to know where to get the data from. The other thing we need to do is have the data being accessible. If you've got a rubbish spreadsheet, everybody's had that, it just doesn't seem to work, you've got all these errors, that's no use. Also, although this is not really what it means by being data accessible, actually being able to get data sources that you're able to plug in and utilise is also going to be really important. Anybody who's listened to people like Preston Dennett's actually written a book on people who've been abducted from cars, and it'd be fantastic to see the sort of data that comes from a Tesla, for example. However, I seriously doubt that Tesla are going to allow you to plug into one of their PCs or one of their cars and get data from it. So data needs to be accessible once it's on our systems, but also we need to get the data into our systems in the first place. Another thing within the UFO community is our data quality is actually extremely poor. Arrow, for example, have said only between 2 and 5% of any sightings that they've actually received actually seem to be genuinely anomalous. So we need to be able to improve that. So instead of it being 2 or 5, it becomes 10, 15, 20, 50, 75, etc., etc. And that's going to be hard. So we need to build in data quality into how we collect the data, how we analyse the data, and also how we report on the data as well. I will be talking about data quality in future slides. However, there are a few principles I believe that are going to really help us getting data quality from the get-go. The first one, we need to be able to collect data without having human intervention. Unfortunately, one of the things that happens, and it isn't talked about too much, is that when humans actually start to do some sort of analysis, we tend to make mistakes. We tend to write down, instead of 10 p.m., it was 10 a.m., for example. Simple mistakes, but they affect data quality. One study was actually, when it came to hospitals, was actually the fact that most of the mistakes were actually when people were actually misreading other people's notes. So being able to automate the data without human intervention is going to be absolutely critical to improving data quality. Everybody's probably heard about AI and how they're actually looking at maybe stopping AI because they feel it's getting too advanced or it's becoming too much a threat. However, one thing that's probably not spoken about out with the AI community is actually looking at data lineage. So, for example, the BBC, for example, are very concerned about deepfake photographs. And these are photographs that are so real that you can't tell the difference between a real photograph and a fake photograph. And one of the things that they're looking at is what's called data lineage, being able to understand the source of the data, all the processes gone through before it's actually reached the source, reached the person that's going to be publishing it. These are the sort of things, not only within deepfake, but all forms of AI that are going to be able to improve data quality, understanding if there's any sort of mistake or sources that seem to be unreliable, being able to identify them, correct them, or stop using them. Again, it doesn't sound that important, but if you've looked, anybody that's looked at things like Skinwalker and the Pentagons, for example, they'll talk a great deal about data warehouses that OSAP had actually created. And one of the key fundamental principles of a data warehouse is actually having lineage of your data. I work as a BI manager. I actually develop data warehouses, and that's one thing I have to be very careful about throughout the process. Also, we need to get data as quickly as possible. One of the things that we tend to have is that whenever it takes a bit longer to actually get a sighting in, people's memory seems to fade. So getting the data as quickly as possible will also help us be able to get more accurate sightings. And lastly, I can't read my handwriting, even though I just said that that's one of the things that could be one of the data quality issues. Actually, I'm just going to leave that one. I can't even remember. But yeah, and again, we're going to have to look at we're going to have established metrics. If we want to have a worldwide system, a worldwide database, we have to have established metrics. And one of the things that's actually always spoken about is the Martian Global Surveyor Program. Back in 1989, there was a program actually to send a space probe to Mars. And unfortunately, the satellite was destroyed. And the reason why it was destroyed is that a lot of the calculations were done in pounds and ounces. And when NASA came over, they were actually expected to be in kilos and grams. They mistook the atmosphere, and it burned up in the atmosphere before it even reached the ground. So, although it sounds a bit simple or a bit silly, these are actually really important metrics within a data science solution, and that's whether it's an AI or any form of business intelligence solution. So, probably the first one I'd like to talk about how we can collect data is images. And nowadays, with mobile phones, with dash cams, with door cams, images and videos are all over the place. However, there's other forms of technology that are out there that are also really effective. There's a new type of technology that's all over the place called Internet of Things, or IoT. And some of the more modern, say for example, dishwashers are using IoT, and it's pretty much used in all sorts of scenarios. It's used in industry a great deal, and it's quite powerful. It's simply a set of cheap devices, cheap sensors, and quite accessible software. There's been some UFO organisations that have used IoT devices. They're no longer in operation. But there is one group that actually monitor meteors. And they've been using IoT devices called Raspberry Pis and using cameras on them to capture meteors. What they've been doing is using artificial intelligence, and that type of artificial intelligence called classification, to actually weed out things like planes, bats, birds, and it only leaves meteors actually coming into the atmosphere. Nowadays as well, we also have drones, and a new type of technology that's coming out is called CubeSats. And CubeSats is basically satellites that are actually launched into near-Earth orbits and are actually able to get some really relevant data. There's a company in Canada that are actually looking to launch a CubeSat that's actually going to be capturing data with in the infrared and the visual spectrum purely for UFOs. Another thing that's going to be really useful is that this classification form of AI, if you're using Microsoft AI, something that's called Azure Cognitive Services, it's actually able to be done, you can actually download it. So you can download it to a mobile phone, you can download it to an IoT device, but you can also even download it to drones, for example. So we have quite a lot of powerful tools. But in terms of data quality, it seems to be sightings are where we get the most form of errors. And there's ways we can do to actually reduce the number of errors that we get. For example, we can now have we can actually check things like flight data or even satellites and planet data. So flight apps are quite common, but there's also apps like Stellarium, for example, that allow us to see if we have satellites in the orbit, stars or planets. What I would love to see was some sort of organisation that's able to amalgamate both flight data with planetary data, satellites and stars. So that if somebody was to take a picture, even if it's just a white blur, which it tends to be a lot of the time, we're still able to rule out the sort of like classic things that people normally get mistaken for. We could also use AI to then be able to rule out other things such as bats, birds, for example. So we'd get a really detailed data set just from simple things like mobile phone technology. Where mobile phones or other form of technologies are going to be really useful is actually the fact that they're going to have data behind them, such as time, date, and location. These sort of details will actually, again, even if the picture's a bit blurry or usually wouldn't be considered useful, actually still then become a genuinely anomalous sighting or data point. So there's a great deal we can do. There's a vast amount we can do just with normal sightings. IoT covers a great deal of sensors. It covers the vast majority of the electromagnetic spectrum. It also covers things like temperature or even things like pressure. If anybody's watched things like The Curse of the Skinwalker Ranch, you've probably seen that a lot of the time the technology or the batteries, for example, seem to die really quickly. Even again, the skinwalkers in the Pentagon, they actually talk about OSAP, for example, we're noticing that batteries died really quickly. We can actually, with IoT devices, record electrical currents and see if the flow starts to diminish a bit. We can record temperatures. So when it comes to things like even with ghost or paranormal investigations, a gentleman that Gordon's had at his fraternity society is a gentleman called Steve Parsons. He said that in his book, Ghostology, that some of the real and legitimate anomalies seem to be temperature anomalies, where temperature seems to drop really quickly. So with these sort of devices, we can get some really good information, and we can get different types of data which hopefully can intersect and improve the data quality significantly. Infrared as well, there's been the pictures of the infrared that have actually been released by the US government. The Mexican government, back in 2004, the same year as the Tic Tacs happened, also released pictures of infrared balls of light that weren't seen by the naked eye, but their pilots were actually tracked on their infrared cameras, something called forward-looking IR, and they saw these massive balls of light that should have been visible to them, but were only recorded in the infrared spectrum. I've also personally had experiences where I couldn't see something, but infrared did seem to actually pick up something that I couldn't see. Now, my mum's in the audience, and even though I'm in my 40s, I'm about to get into trouble for this, but even though it happened in 1996. I went to the pub with my friend when I was 17, so I'm about to get into trouble for underage drinking, even though it was almost 30 years ago. And when I came back, I had to take the dog out for a walk, and I saw this smoke, and this sort of, it was like, have you ever seen smoke in a high wind, and it just seems to blow really quickly? Well, this seemed to just stay there but move around incredibly fast. And the first night I saw it, it just seemed to be doing its own thing, and it was almost like, if you've ever seen the Predator movie, that sort of like shimmering effect. That's exactly what it was like. First night I walked around the block, it didn't seem to take notice of me. The second night it did, and it started to follow me down the street, and it would start to change. First of all, I would start to see lights coming out of it, or light coming out of it like a beam, and then sometimes it would just go a bit transparent and then it would become invisible again. It was changing its shape all the time. Then it would go invisible, but the one thing that kept on going on was all the security lights in the street that I lived in at the time. And even though when I couldn't see it, again, it would then come back into focus, and it would change shape. So first of all, that sort of like smoky colour, smoky thing, and then all of a sudden they were like small lights. And I can't really describe how much it changed, but it was incredibly dynamic in its change. But the one thing that did seem to happen was that the security lights went on and off while it seemed to follow me down the street. And honestly, guys, I was really, really scared. One thing as well is that for about 3 or 4 days afterwards, when the neighbour's security lights went on and off throughout the day. And every time I had to take the dog out at the time, I was really scared just to get out of the house. It did calm down, but it does show you where we can use things like IR technologies. These sort of motion cameras, we can actually put into different locations and use them, and they're going to be really, really cheap. So even for people who don't have much experience with technology, these things are actually quite accessible for us. It's not going to be anything like what OSHAP have, but we can actually utilise that sort of technology to our advantage and get some real insights. However, where I think where AI is going to really shine is actually going to get person-centred insights. This is quite something I wasn't too sure about, and when I was first investigating AI, I would never have thought about looking at us instead of looking at sightings instead. The first type of AI we can use is again utilised by Microsoft, and it's called chatbots. And chatbots are actually, there's a number of services within that Microsoft or Amazon or Google are able to provide, and they're actually quite cheap. So for example, if you want to take about 1,000 images or 10,000 images, it costs about £2. However, cloud technologies does get very expensive. They catch you in some other way. However, chatbots give us a fantastic advantage. While maybe for MUFON or any other form of investigator, we might have to wait 3, 4, 5 days or even weeks before we're able to speak to a witness. With a chatbot, we're able to speak to a witness minutes after a sighting has actually happened. So what tends to happen within sightings is that people, as time goes on, people's memories seem to change. It's well known that memories seem to get a little bit more faded and a bit jaded and a bit different as time goes on. So by able to get in using chatbots and being able to get data as quickly as possible, we're going to improve the data quality right off the bat. But there's also other things that we can do with chatbots. We can actually have things like sentiment analysis, which is really useful. So we can determine whether a sighting was either positive or negative. And we can also get language services as well. So we'd be able to translate things from French or Spanish. So it means that we can have a more global database. If you look at things like New Forex database, they do seem to be only centred in the US. So having language services does allow us to have a more globalistic database for us to use. Social media is, again, something that we all use. One of the cases I investigated 2 years ago was from Facebook. From the start, we can actually download Twitter data. It's really, really common. But what we can use social media for is actually to find trends within people, trying to find things that seem to be quite common within specific type of people. And these are sort of like things that people are like UFOs or whatever, but there's quite a lot of things we can do from it. Also, we have wearable technologies. And if you ever hear about people who have experienced alien abductions, there tends to be some things prior to alien abductions that actually seem to be almost like warning signs. So people seem to be a bit more, have more anxiety, or tend to be a bit more sleepless, for example. We'll be able to track that. Wearable technology can track things like heartbeats, can also track things like light sleep patterns. So if we start to see things like that, we can actually develop what are called models, which are essentially AI programs that actually try and see if there's any patterns or any trends within within abductions or any form of experiences within the UFO, within the paranormal domain. And lastly, it's something called CRM. And CRM essentially means customer relational model. One thing is there's about 100, 200 people here today. What tends to happen is that we look at, when polls are taken, about 10% of like the US population seem to believe that they've seen a UFO. We need to utilise and get these sightings. Things like CRM allow us to actually contact people and actually engage with them and actually have decent relationships with people that last for years. And by able to have CRM, we're actually able to find out more data, not just from a sighting, but from people themselves. Where that's going to be really useful for is things like Kenneth Arnold, who actually first saw the first UFO flying saucers back in 1947. Kenneth Arnold didn't just see one fleet of flying saucers. Things started to happen to him after he saw them. And it's the same with people who have been on Skinwalker Ranch, for example. They've had this hitchhiker effect. So being able to actually track not the sightings, but by the people and try and find their insights and what's happened to them, that's going to be phenomenally more effective than what we've got currently. For example, I'll give one example in my personal life, is after that sighting I had, I got quite scared. However, I also had subsequent sightings afterwards, and it always seemed to be a little bit further back. It was like they knew I was scared, so they kept themselves a bit further back, hopefully to sort of elevate the fear levels that I had in that sighting. I saw them 97, 98, 99, 2002, and then again another one in 2016, and they never were the same after that time I first saw them. So by being able to also see people look at people and track their sightings, we can actually be able to track how the UFO and how the phenomena actually interacted with them, and see if there's any form of difference within the phenomena and how it's interacted with witnesses, experiencers, and abductees. There's a few others I'd like to speak about. First of all, incident management. This is actually something to do with what's called structured data. If you have like a help desk or a service desk or sort of case management system, it actually makes the data a lot more queryable and a lot more accessible. Nowadays, a lot of the data in solutions like in the cloud, for example, the vast majority of the data is what's called unstructured. So that's like images or sound. And while it's really useful, what you find is the most useful data, although it's only about 20% of it, is actually data that's in a database. So if you're able to get data into a database, it makes reporting and analysis a lot more easier. So instead of having things on a spreadsheet or anything like that, having it on an incident management system is going to be a lot more effective. One thing that I'm quite shocked that nobody's ever thought about is actually tracking system health. Again, when we're looking at things like Skinwalker Ranch or what USAP are looking at, is that battery health or batteries dying really quickly seem to be a really common occurrence. And a lot of people, especially myself, I've been on investigations where this has happened. It seems to be when I'm on ghost hunts, batteries seem to die really, really quickly. So what would be really good is actually to see what's happening to our technology before it starts to die. Again, I spoke about how we can monitor electrical flows, but nowadays we can even monitor things like battery health. But we can also see what's actually happening internally within the systems. Is the processor, the CPU, is that starting to go higher or lower? Is the memory or the RAM, is that seeming to spike or go down? But also we can look at things like error logs, for example, and to see if any sort of errors actually happening. This is quite a common use of IoT devices. And again, it's something that could really utilise some phenomenal sort of information. Sound, again. Again, Steve Parsons, the chap who Gordon had at the Platoon Society, has actually written a book called Infrasound, where infrasound seems to affect people. It seems to be when people are subjected to high levels of infrasound, they actually seem to believe that they're experiencing some sort of paranormal phenomenon. With IoT devices, we can actually monitor the level of infrasound. Furthermore, there's other things that we can do. We can actually then try, if we use devices such as IoT devices, we can triangulate where noises are coming from. So say, for example, and you're doing some sort of ghost investigation, if you have IoT devices at certain positions and some sort of like weird noise happens, you're actually then able to detect and triangulate where that noise has come from. And if you know that somebody's not in that position, again, it adds that sort of higher level to anomalies, makes it a bit more anomalous. During the course of the investigation, I actually spoke to Paul Sinclair, and Paul Sinclair is well known for his truth magazines and also in the Night People as well. I was going to say In the Night Garden. I've got a young child, and I'm too used to the sort of like child TV shows. Paul's one of the best investigators in the UK, and one of Paul's suggestions was actually to say that when things seem to be getting a bit quieter, that's potentially something that seems to be anomalous. So if we're able to have devices that are listening to sound, if things start to seem to be a little bit quieter, again, we've potentially got some form of anomaly. A couple of other things I was thinking about was dream diaries. I personally had unusual dreams that seem to be associated, dream diary, unusual dreams. A few days later, or a few weeks later, I seem to have a UFO encounter. It seems to, it's not only myself, I was speaking to a gentleman a couple of hours ago who actually was saying the same thing. So I think there's going to be a lot of things within dream analysis that we can use. People have been doing hypnotherapy for a number of years, and it does seem to be a bit invasive. However, dream analysis, if we can especially do it en masse, will allow us to do will allow a less invasive way. And if we can see patterns within dreams, we hopefully can actually develop insights from it. And lastly, things like websites and blogs. Even the MOD have got a list of sightings, for example. Being able to utilise that data and put it into a cloud-based solution, again, is another form of data. When it comes to analysis, the more recent organisation that's come about recently is called Enigma Labs. And Enigma Labs are looking to employ data scientists, and the data scientists seem to have actually filled the position. They were paying up to £172,000. This is an extremely in-demand set of skills. There's other set of skills within data science, such as data engineering, and also data analysis, and I can't remember the last one, AI, sort of machine learning as well. However, they're extremely expensive. Furthermore, I was saying before, the cloud is also extremely expensive. So we're going to have to find ways of analysing data really cheaply. Places like MUFON, for example, have actually gotten around this problem, and the best organisation to get past it was actually an organisation called NUFORAC, which I've briefly mentioned. What they did was actually release their data set of about 80,000 sightings to a website called Kaggle, like a Kaggle of witches. And Kaggle has been an absolute phenomenal success. On the Kaggle website, there's something like 192 different submissions where people have looked at things such as how fast the UFO was going, what shape, what colour, what did it do, the description, but also when it was seen, where it was seen, and what was the temperature like. There's other people have gone further than that and tried to see other sort of correlations. One strong correlation was actually whenever some sort of big cultural event, such as the X-Files being released, there was an increase in sightings. So there was a number. So by releasing it to something like Kaggle, we did see that we could have some really good in-depth analysis. The thing with things like Kaggle, for example, is then it went on to places like The Sun and other tabloids actually start to take that data and actually publish that data. So when we're performing analysis, by crowdsourcing it, by having that sort of data democratic solution where anybody can go and investigate the solution, again, you don't need to use AI or data analytics. Even things like Excel would actually work quite well. We can actually get phenomenal amounts of analysis. It doesn't need to be data analysis. It doesn't need to be any form of really expensive data collection. Anybody can do this with cheap technology. So there's two different types of ways I'd like to describe how we can analyse data. The first one is going to be things like sightings. That's going to be the normal one. And again, as I said before, this could be things like what's the description of the craft, where were they seen, were there any sort of like landmarks like military bases or standing stones. I'm a big fan of things like standing stones and ley lines, but also things like weather, what sort of trends, and as I said before about the X-Files or like when Independence Day came in '96, what sort of cultural factors could actually increase the type of sightings. This type of analysis is what's called descriptive analytics, and what that is data that we know about that's happened in the past. There's also a type of analytics called real-time analytics, and that's things that are happening just now. And things like with cloud technology, we can actually do analysis and even AI, and even utilize AI and other forms of analytics on the data real time. And where that would be useful is for things like CA5s or sky watches. We can actually then use that sort of data to utilize things like ultraviolet technology or even infrared technology. So even if people aren't seeing things with the naked eye, are we able to see things in these different other ranges when we're doing these sort of investigations? The type of analytics that artificial intelligence is really good at is what's called predictive analytics. Now, while I've spoken about descriptive analytics being in the past and real-time analytics being real time, everybody would think that predictive analytics is about what's happening in the future, but it's not just about what's happening in the future. One really common form of AI analysis is actually fraud detection, things that have happened in the past. So the description of predictive analytics are things that are going to happen in the future, but also things that we don't know about. Unfortunately, though, and I'm going to be frank, AI is not going to be very much use for this. When it comes to sightings, it's going to be that descriptive analytics gives us more insights than predictive analytics ever will. And we've got to also take in mind that as technology has improved, descriptive analytics have become vastly more powerful and vastly more insightful as well. However, where predictive analytics is going to really shine is when we start to look at ourselves. While we can still use descriptive analytics, we can actually use predictive analytics in extraordinarily powerful means. Nowadays, if you look back at 2000 and saw the most profitable companies at that time, it would be things like Pfizer or Walmart or I can't remember, Citigroup, for example. Nowadays, the most profitable companies in the world are Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, and all the things they have in common is data. Google and Facebook, for example, in particular, are taking data specifically on us and allowing us, and then allow marketing companies to actually marketize data. This is through having personalized data and understanding us. And by understanding us, this is where I feel we're going to get the best insights. If you look at things like OSAP, for example, they were incredibly interested in things like the human body. They actually believed that they could get real insights from immune systems, for example. And they're not the only person that's believed that. More currently, rather than OSAP, is Gary Nolan, who's done tremendous work in the UFO community. And again, he's looking at things like MRI scanners to see links between UFOs and people that have had something similar to Havana syndrome. However, what seems to be missed by everybody is that with social media, with wearable technology, we get a really, really good picture of what people are like, and we can start to find out trends in people. These sort of trends probably will probably produce things that we just cannot imagine happening, or things that we just haven't seen yet. However, it can also be things that we probably suspect. OSAP, for example, believed that people who saw UFOs also seemed to have strong psychic abilities afterwards. And we could use these sort of social media technologies to actually see if that's true. Now, while using Facebook and trying to see if people who have seen UFOs seem to be interested in psychic phenomena or other sort of phenomena that's associated with the paranormal community, it's not going to be definitive. We're not going to know for sure just because somebody likes something or is in a group that they have got psychic phenomena. However, what it is definitely insightful. And the fact that this is how Google have made their money, or Facebook have made their money, by actually finding these sort of trends, actually suggests there's a phenomenal amount of value by sort of investigating social media technology. Again, it's going to be looking at identifying trends within human behaviour, and it's going to be something that's a bit unusual. However, I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of insight into social media and trying to get understanding of who we are. I genuinely feel that where the most insight is going to come from isn't going to be from UFOs, but how UFOs affect us, and that could be in any number of ways. Again, you've probably heard about the hitchhiker effect, where people have been on Skinwalker Ranch and something seems to follow them home, seems to affect their children and even their friends. Being able to find out things like that is going to where technology, where our insights are going to come from in the future. So lastly, before I'm about to finish, we need to report this data. This process needs to be iterative. We need to be able to find out what sort of questions people want, and the reason we find that out is finding out what questions people are asking. Nowadays, we have really powerful visualization tools where we can actually interact and drill down with the data. However, there's other things like ChatGPT that are also going to be very, very effective. When ChatGPT, for example, there's other sort of models, we can actually go in and actually record what people are actually asking. If we can actually find out what people are asking, we can put that in a database, we can aggregate the data, and we can actually get insight on what people want to know. From there, we can use that to define our questions and keep an iterative process where people can get the answers that they need. So that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's been insightful, and thank you very much.
Excellent.